So the recording has started, and I'm very happy to have Elisa Flores join us today because she is somebody that I have known for quite a while. I think I knew her personally before I knew her as a student, and then it was very exciting for me to see her progress through the Translational Biomedical Sciences at University of Rochester, and more so that she found, I think, a perfect niche for her to use her science and her communication abilities. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen here first.
Yep, I see it.
Okay, great. All right, so I just want to do a quick thank you to Dr. Tracy Bass. I do know her personally, and she was consider her one of my mentors, not a research mentor, but she was really important in my grad school life. And thank you all for being here. And I really appreciate, listening to my brief career story. So a little about myself first. So I was born in Los Angeles. When I was young, I moved to upstate New York and Rochester, but I went back and forth throughout my whole life. And then I went to Stony Brook University and grad school at the University of Rochester, which I'll talk about. So here's the timeline. So please don't do the math of my timeline and my age. But in 2011, I graduated from Stony Brook University. While there, I had an NIH MARC Fellowship, which was targeted for minority students to gain research experience. And with that program, you had to promise to do your PhD, and my advisors really wanted me to go straight to my PhD, but I was really burnt out. I worked in 2 different labs, in an HIV and an environmental science lab. So I decided to get a job. So I worked as a lab tech and at this company where it was kind of like a third party. So we tested imported foods for illegal antibiotics, pesticides, chemicals for distribution in the United States, whether it's seafood or rice, etc. And then we did FDA reports back to them, whether it passed or failed. And then I realized I was ready to go back to grad school when I was doing SOP, which are standard operating protocols, for fun. I was rewriting them, trying to optimize SOPs. So I realized, okay, it's time to go back. So then I took some time to do some research, and I thought I didn't have enough experience to go straight to my PhD, which retrospect I did, again, imposter syndrome. So I applied to different post-bac programs or bridge to PhD programs, and I landed at the University of Rochester in their micro and immunology program. And it was I was called a prep scholar. It was another NIH fellowship, but I was also an employee through the University of Rochester Medical Center. And through that, this program was amazing. The dean of the graduate school was my advisor to the program. So I really got one-on-one time with her, and the program helped us with GREs and our statements for grad school there. I applied to various different programs, but ended up staying at the University of Rochester in the Translational Biomedical Sciences program. And I ultimately ended up staying in my lab that I was in the post-bac with, because it was just such a great environment, and I loved my project there. And with this program, I was fortunate that they actually require you to submit your qual as an F31 grant. Most quals are much longer, and so kind of doing a shorter version in F31 style is kind of hard doing brevity. But I was fortunate to get my F31 the first time. And with their F31, you have to write all this different activities that you're going to do for your training, and really made me think, okay, what am I going to do in the next 4 years? And so I really put down interdisciplinary seminars that I would go to, toxology, pathology, immunology seminars, take all these different courses, but also science communication. And that's when I realized I really liked it, because those are activities I planned for my F31. And then in 2016, I got nominated by the dean to be a grad student representative at this Executive Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Probably because I spoke up at every town hall possible about this, because, that affected me personally and, friends and colleagues as well. On this committee, I sat with the CEO of the hospital, deans of the various schools, and directors and professors, staff, and that really gave me an insight of, how people work and get things done, a timeline, and execute it. And then in 2017, I actually had to get special permission from the dean to get a part-time job as a science outreach coordinator. This was through an NSF grant that a PI had that I helped with. And we had to do like annual reports. The NSF, had committee reviews also. And through this, I taught third graders at the YMCA, different courses. And it's not just about teaching, like that's a skill, but it really helps you to be the coordinator. So I had to coordinate volunteers, teach the volunteers a lesson, interact with the kids, and, check my to-do list with the YMCA staff and coordinating that, and then reporting back to the PI of the grant as well. And I also did a lot of volunteering with our medical center's life science learning center. So I TA'd for middle schoolers and high schoolers lesson plans of vaccines, the development, and different virus outbreaks as well, lesson plans. So in the summer of 2018, I was wrapping up my work. I submitted my thesis, and the very next day I drove to DC to start my job at the Milken Institute Center of Strategic Philanthropy. And I actually didn't defend my thesis yet. So I had to fly back a month later to defend my thesis, even though I already started my job. And then I was there for 2 years. And then I recently, in September or August 2020, I started at HESI, which stands for the Health and Environmental Sciences Institute, as a scientific program manager. And I can go into more here. Okay, so going back to grad school, the translational program, I kind of want to shout it out a little bit because it really was interdisciplinary. And that's kind of what helped not only my thesis work, but my work to this date. And with this program, it was flexible coursework. So I got to take public health, clinical, and basic science courses. They had flexible rotations. So some people took epidemiology, public health rotations, more clinical research, or basic science. And you had co-advisors. So you had a clinician and you had to have a basic research PI. And what this did, it brought both perspectives on it. And I sat more in the basic science lab, but the clinician would come in and always would be like, what's the bigger picture? How can this impact? Like, what's the ultimate goal? And also having a clinician, you were able to have access to patient samples, and do research with that, like potentially, stem cells, use fat tissue, etc. And so my thesis, I had to look up my exact thesis title because I forgot it. This is not it, but it's in my back of my brain. So I studied how environmental chemicals dysregulate not only the immune system, but contribute to the obesity epidemic by targeting adipogenesis, which is the fat cell formation. And I kind of did a little collage here to show like how interdisciplinary my thesis was, because it involved immunology, toxicology, environmental science, adipogenesis, which is fat cell formation, and then also the how is these environmental chemicals doing this? And we believe there was epigenetics and post-translational modifications. And then so other buckets, so it involved the endocrine system, stem cells, and metabolism, and public health and epidemiology, like trying to find, public health policies on this. So I looked up regulations in the UK is very different than here, of how restricted, chemicals like BPA are, and how that affected public health and stats of that. I also wanted to point out the different things I did in grad school to help gain my science communication, because I realized maybe like my third year and a half in that I really wanted to be more toward a career towards science communications, even though I didn't know what those careers were. So the things I did were, I had a lead lab meeting once a month because that's something that I wanted to do to get feedback and just practice. I led different journal club discussions, signed up for different courses that involved me presenting. I took various science communication and writing workshops and courses at the University of Rochester. So I took 2 official courses. One was for grant writing, one was for general communication. And they offered a lot of different workshops to, how to write your qual, do an F-31, and just general workshops that I actually took them twice sometimes. And even when you go to conferences, they offer these workshops as well. And I would always attend those. Then I presented at every single poster session that was available. And I'm not joking. I presented at the genetics, the immunology program, the lung biology, and even the cancer poster sessions, even though my project had nothing to do with cancer and happened to win that poster session. And also seminar sessions. So because my thesis was so interdisciplinary, I signed up for various student seminars that weren't my department. So I presented at the pathology student seminars, toxicology, immunology, and then our translational program. And I wrote a couple blog posts and lay articles. So I think that's something you guys could also do, challenge yourself just to start writing, take something. I wrote an article of gene therapies and put it in layman's terms so like the general public could understand it. And I also did a couple of blog posts with Dr. Tracy at the BEST program at the University of Rochester about career advice. And then previously what I just talked about, like I conducted several science outreach activities. I tutored middle schoolers. I taught lesson plans for 3rd graders, middle schoolers, and high schoolers, and did public outreach activities. We had something called Thinkers and Drinkers Club at the University of Rochester. And I helped, go to local bars and talk about my science to the public, and also to local museums to talk about the research we were doing. And then informational interviews. I think this is really important, especially if you're in the last few years of your graduate career, is to touch base with people on their career stories and, ask them questions to really know what they're doing. And to prep this is, how to ask engaging questions. And it is communication back and forth with people that are, in these careers. And always at the end, my advice would be to, hey, do you have a colleague in this kind of field that you can connect me with? And most likely they'll say yes. And from that, also connecting with seminar guest speakers. So you should definitely go up to them at the end, send them a follow-up email, go to the lunches or dinners with them to really see their experience and also how they communicate and how they present. And then also conference networking. So I would practice my elevator pitch to companies at different conferences, and I would start with the companies I guess least interested in case you messed up, which I totally botched my elevator pitch trying to get a job, just going up to people. But those I always say practice by doing, because you need to get familiar with your elevator pitch. You need to have a one-liner, a 3-minute, and a 10-minute, more detailed, and have it honed in and practice to talk. And also at these conferences, they have mentoring events that I would always go to connect with people in the fields that you want to go into, and definitely follow up with these mentors that you meet and keep add them in your LinkedIn. I'm still connected with some people that I met in grad school that have referred me to jobs. Okay, so going towards, I skipped my postdoc. I didn't do a postdoc because I knew science wasn't for me. And you can start out at a higher level if you do a postdoc, because they do value that experience. But I knew science communication was for me, and I saw this job at the Milken Institute, and I thought, this is the job for me now. And I put consultant here because it really is more of a consultant job, because our department was client-based. So we worked with individual ultra high net worth philanthropists and also nonprofit foundations that needed help scanning, doing landscape analysis. So we did different projects that they wanted to start their whole grant initiative, or they wanted to just, where can they fund? Where needed to be funded? Is it at a trainee level, funding postdocs? Is it doing a whole $100 million grant program? Or is it just like a paper of like the gaps that are missing from this field? So with this, the three buckets of this job are like landscape analysis, grants management, and convenings. The convening part is a little less of the job, but it was still like 1/3 part of my job. So with the landscape analysis, you do your research, you do your due diligence. If the topic is a rare disease, what's in the field, what are the key papers out there, who are the KOLs, and the KOLs, which stand for key opinion leaders. So these are the researchers, the conferences and organizations that are very prominent in the field. And then research the gaps in the field, what are the barriers to overcome them, and present like what are the potential solutions. And the next step of that would be to interview these KOLs and also invite them to a potential retreat. So bringing a scientific retreat for a specific project. So you would bring outside people in from different sectors. So people from nonprofits, from academia, and from the private sector, and the government, to talk about this issue and what really needs to get done. And that really helps, from these interviews and retreats, helped us do our client recommendations. You're like, okay, here are the gaps, and here's where your ventures and your capital could be most beneficial based from the field. And from that, we do public reports and white papers on our findings. And I think those are really important for the field at large. And okay, and then also grants management. So I was also a grants manager with this job, and with that, it was like controlled like $13 million. And the PIs reported to us on this rare disease and gene therapy program. And so I helped monitor the progress. So this was doing check-ins, progress reports, getting back to them, generating, just a layman's term for a client. So I would have to synthesize a 20-page progress report into 2 pages, and then following up with the project revisions. And also there's 2 different sections to the grants managers. There's pre-award and post-award. So I helped with the letters of intent, the RFPs, which stands for request for proposals, helped with executed agreements, which I had to do a lot with lawyers, which was a total new experience to me. And then the post-award, again, is this progress monitoring. And with that, I learned a lot about budgets because we had to do a lot of budgets and analyze, their year-to-year financial, and it had you had to have specific reasons of why to do carryover budgets, which I learned a lot about there. And also intellectual property, dealing a lot with lawyers too, and what's patentable and what's not. And then advisory board. So I created an advisory board for this grant program. Again, it's kind of like the landscape analysis. I had to, do who are the key people in this field that could help contribute towards these projects. And I helped do their annual meeting specifically for this grant program. And then also I went to related conferences for that and reported back to the client. And then convening. So again, I did convenings specifically for my projects, but also you have to do convenings outside my project to help with their events. So Milken Institute has several conferences themselves that they host, and one specifically is their larger one, and then one is just for health. And so sometimes I would help with programming of my specific project or someone else's project. And that's, the programming and agendas, like what are we going to talk about? Are we going to do breakout session? Is it going to be a public or private event? If so, if it's private, who are we inviting? Who do we want in that room to contribute, to help, come to a meaningful discussion and solution to our, overall arching problem. And then also speakers list. So you would have to tier speakers. You wanted to be, diverse and inclusive as well. And that includes, young investigators. Often young investigators are left out of the list because tenured people have all these papers, which their experience is very valued. But we really want to get those young perspectives and people in the room and to gain experience. And also with that, you have to prep the speaker meeting. So that's a lot to go through. You have to select your moderators. I was fortunate to be a moderator at one of these events. And sometimes, most of the times, moderators may be a celebrity or a celebrity news anchor as well. and then room setup. So I had no experience with this before, but the room setup is very important, and you work with the like, if it's at the Hyatt, you work with them how to set up the room and how to be more engaging. Do you want it a stadium style? Do you want it a square, a circle, small circles? Because the way you set up the room sets up the precedent, like how the conversation can go and how everyone can interact with each other. And then I transitioned to HESI, which went more towards kind of similar duties to the job, but it was really towards kind of like my thesis work and the mission and goals that aligned with myself. So HESI is a nonprofit organization. They bring together multi-sector, so people from academia, government, industry, nonprofits, and government, to collaboratively work together to not only identify like what's the problem, what are the gaps, and then also find solutions how to help and resolve global health and environmental challenges. So quick plug that we have over 291 partners, mostly from academia. And what we do in general is, we scan like what are the emerging issues? Do we have to add another committee to our portfolio? Currently, HESI has like, I think over a dozen different committees, and I help co-manage 3 of them. But we're still constantly scanning if we have to add, new projects. And then once, a project or a new committee is identified, we form multi-sector teams who really hone in and define that problem. And then we do different workshops, or we do annual meetings to bring in different experts in. And then we find recommendations, and all of our stuff is like made public. So like the main, I would say, overarching on duties that I do, they're very interconnecting, is strategic planning, not only at my committee level that I manage, but also at the HESI level. What are the new emerging issues that we have to do? We're coming up with several like award programs. And so I help co-managing that. And then the duty of program management of my committees, and then convening. So we have our HESI annual event, we have our board meetings, and then we have our individual committee meetings that we do. And also we're doing a training event in Japan, a training course that we created with one of our committees. So training events also. So a couple of things that our committees do that I oversee. So within the committee, they do their own strategic planning that I help. We create the mission, the duties, the timeline, how they're going to execute this problem. So, what are the gaps? What are the new projects you have to do, and how to execute? And then with that step is data sharing and collection and analysis. So all of our committee members, some committees have over 100 people. We have subgroups in them, and then break it down even further to subcommittees that have totally different projects within the umbrella of one committee. And the different multi-sector scientists share their data. So even if it's a private company like Novartis, they can have permission to share their data. It might have to be de-identified or be anonymous to share, but we could still work with that data. And then we have these great, huge data spreadsheets. And then we have analysis of that. And from that, we might say like, hey, there's not enough data to make a conclusion. We have to go back to do novel experiments. So then some labs offer up their own lab to do research, and they collaborate, academia with the private industry will work together to do these experiments. And from that, they do manuscripts or review articles of what they did. Also, I'd like to point out, HESI is not, we do not have direct influence on any regulatory things. We don't, or policies, and we do not do lobbying. But certain situations, the FDA will come out with guidance like, hey, this is what we're thinking, or this is a call to experts to provide your input on. Same with the European version of the FDA. Like they come out and say, hey, we're welcome to any revisions for people to provide back. And so the committees will come and they'll work on, this is what's lacking in the field, this is what needs to be done. And then they'll send that out. And sometimes verbatim what they wrote in this text will be copied into certain things in different policies. And also a big part of that gap is tools and assay development. So for it to be more safer medicine, safer clinical trials and whatnot, there needs to be more effective tools and assays. And part of that also is alternative methods and to not use animals. So there's a big call on that. And so that's a lot of our projects also focus on that. And then again, I mentioned scientific meetings and training. So a lot of our groups have their annual meetings. They'll do multiple a year. They also present their data from HESI at external conferences, and then training. So we have different training modules that we're creating in different science outreach opportunities. And here's just an example of like annual report that we have. Gene Talks is one of the committees that I oversee now. We had, now they're in progress. So we had like 8 publications from 2020 coming out. Our partners include 10 government and regulatory agencies, academic research institutes, and over 30 industry partners. And we had collaborations with internal fellow committees and also the OECD, which is a regulatory organization in Europe. And so I'll end with just career advice that I was given and that what I experienced are the three things that kind of overlap with each other is networking. So anytime you have opportunity to network, do that, whether you're at a conference, catching up with a fellow grad student or an older grad student that from your years, I think that's really important. And that goes kind of with mentoring. Find different mentors in different aspects, not only your PI, like find other people outside that could help you. Due diligence, so always do your research. If you're interviewing or for your project, always be confident in what you're saying because you know that information. And hand in hand goes preparedness / professionalism. So always be prepared. Whenever I submit a draft document, it's always polished. It's always formatted. My emails are always organized. And I think that's outwardly how you present yourself. But I'm always happy. I'm open to more questions about that during the Q&A. And so with that, I want to say thank you, everybody, and happy to take any questions and to be more candid during the Q&A. And here's a picture of my dog. And thank you again, Tracy.